Greetings, Anthillians, and welcome to Anthill TV. I'm joined with Peter Chambers here, who's an independent consultant who helps organisations unlock their cash flow so that they can invest in other important things like innovation.
Indeed.
Peter, we were talking a little bit earlier, and you mentioned that there are about 7 things that an organisation can do to unlock cash flow. Can you rattle those off for me?
Well, it's the perennial issue, isn't it, for the small business, that cash flow factor. People tend to think that profit equals cash flow, and it couldn't be further from the truth. So you've essentially got, as you said, 7 points that can influence or drive or impact upon your cash flow. You've got growth, you've got price, you've got the cost of selling goods, so the cost of goods sold, you've got your day's inventory, operational expenses, and the days tied up in your debtors and in your creditors as well. So they're your 7.
All right, so let's break down some of these in a little bit more detail.
Yep.
Growth. Now that's in there because growth is expensive.
Absolutely. I mean, businesses lose sight of the fact that growth costs money. It's just a fact of a reality, that the fact that you are going to grow, you're going to have to invest up front, be it in people, in software, in IT, capital equipment, all those sorts of things do take money.
And it's funny too, because you can look at your books and you say, look at how profitable we are. And then you invest in growth, and then suddenly you realise you've got no money.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Work out why.
Yeah.
One of the other reasons why that is the case is often the disconnect between accounts payable and accounts receivable. You had them as the last 2 in the chain.
Well, always better to get the money in before you pay it out, isn't it? We were talking off air before, and you mentioned Australians don't tend to like to actually go and ask for money, but we're always so honest that we go out and pay it before it's due. So,
according to Dun & Bradstreet, it takes 51 days to get paid in Australia on average. That's how long it takes to get paid. We send invoices on 14-day terms, and we don't get paid for 51 days. That's the average.
Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, there's a loss of capital and a loss of cash flow from minute 1, but also how quickly are you actually invoicing? You're doing the work on the 5th of the month and sitting that job lot in a drawer until the 31st when you actually get around to invoicing. Well, there's another 20-odd days. Yeah.
So invoice quick. Follow them up quick.
Have a process, I think. Have a process around it. So, I mean, if you find five days worth of working capital within your receivables, within your debtors, you'd be surprised.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a function of turnover. So your turnover times 5 days, you can see that up pretty quickly.
5 days, that could be the name of your best-selling
5 days,
book.
you think?
Yeah, 5 days.
I'll go with that. I'll follow that. Do I need to acknowledge you in that?
Yeah, I'll be on the front cover. Thanks, James, for all your help. You mentioned price as well too.
Yeah, look, I think price is one that gets lost. I think we just, here's our goods and what do we do? And we're going to grow, so let's just put it up 5% or whatever it might be. But you've got to look at where your product sits in the market. Is it a premium product? Are you charging a premium price for that premium product? Is it very generic, so therefore that you have to sit in line with mainstream pricing? I think those things get lost a little bit.
It is interesting, cash flow an issue. Why not just increase the price of your product or service if you can get away with it?
If you can get away with it, absolutely. Because that's a freebie. Price alone is a freebie. It doesn't cost anything. If you're going to manufacture more or you're going to sell more by taking more people on or whatever, there's a cost associated with that. But price is a freebie, absolutely.
And sometimes as well too, organisations price their product at a point where they think it's worth, but in a way they're telling the market that they're a discount product or service.
Again, it gets lost, doesn't it?
And they'll get slaughtered. A case study. What's an example of a company that you've worked?
Yeah, a company which is probably the best case study is a business that effectively the terminology is overtrading. It grew at a rapid rate. So
what was the business doing?
It's in a manufacturing environment, and importing and wholesaling as well. So a little bit of manufacturing, but essentially a wholesaler. I always love
when people say they work in importing. I always think of Arthur Daly from Minder. They say, what do you do? A bit of import, bit of export, bit of this, bit of that. But they were a manufacturing business and they were importing and exporting.
Yeah, well, this business picked up a new contract. It was growing at 20% year on year, but the reality was that all of that 20% that they were growing, there was more than that in terms of what they were holding in inventory. So the inventory was increasing at a greater rate than what the growth rate was. So fantastic, we're making more, we're importing more, we're doing all those sorts of things, and we're actually selling more, but we got more on the stock and we're collecting slower. So it was sucking up cash. This business was growing at, at 20% per annum, but they were losing close to $500,000 in cash a year. Simply by getting that equation wrong.
The inventory. Now that's another way to free up the cash flow.
Absolutely.
Because if it's sitting there gathering dust, you could, whatever the product is, you could
move it on,
sell it.
Yeah.
It's funny, we'll do this in our houses and we understand this intuitively. We'll clear out the spare room and have a garden sale. Whereas if, and make some extra cash because we don't use that stuff in that spare room anymore. But as a business, we for some reason hang on to it as an asset.
It's a policy and it's a process thing as well, to have a policy that says, you know, when is that piece of stock obsolete? What does history tell us in terms of when we can sell it and when we can't sell it? And there comes a point where it's just better to cut your losses, sell it at cost, and get the cash flow back in. Yeah,
and improve your cash flow that way.
Absolutely. Yep.
Now, when you go into an organisation, one of the first things that you do is you tend to look at their historical numbers.
Well, absolutely. History tells us things. So you need to learn from history, and you need to learn, I suppose, what the trends are of that business. What's deteriorating, what's improving, and where the benefits might be created. But what I tend to do is not what I tend to do. What I do is to work with business in forecasting to say, well, what is the impact of improving those debtors collection days by 5? We're back to the book again, aren't we? So what is it? So you can actually, it's not a hard equation to figure out. We collect 5 days earlier, what's the cash flow impact? We get rid of the obsolete stock and bring the day's inventory down, what's the cash flow and impact? So that's what I do. Yeah.
And after a while, you can see a picture emerge that allows people to unlock their cash flow and invest in other things. And so now you've got the cash flow. What do you do with it?
Well, again, you talk about things like growth and innovation.
You get yourself a Maserati and a giant boat.
Come on, you're talking to an ex-banker here, James. I mean, we don't like Maseratis. We don't like European cars and fish bowls and marble granite bench tops in the foyer.
Right.
They're bad signs for a banker.
Yep.
Now, look, it can fund growth, it can fund innovation, it can fund those sorts of programs. I think things like innovation are seen generally as a cost to a business, and the age-old question, is it cost or is it investment? But what I'm trying to do is free up cash flow so the business can actually say, we can go to the next level, and that great harebrained scheme that we left on the drawing board a while ago, we can actually implement because we've got more cash to do it with.
It's interesting. I always come across two types of CEOs: ones that are fixated on the money and the cost of running the business. Other people who are fixated on growth. It seems that you need to get both of them right, and what we're talking about here is putting measures in place so that you can look after
it. And for that typically small business, they're under-resourced. All the IP and all the knowledge and all the foresight and everything else sits with the MD generally, or the business owner, and he's got to go away and put his head on a pillow at night, and that's hard work for him. So to be able to, those businesses tend to be good at what they're good at, but they have their limitations, and they're getting all the equations right. It's a really, really hard job.
And if you don't continue to move forward, you stagnate, you
stand still,
myopic and die. So let's finish on that note. After you've unlocked your cash flow, don't go buy the Maserati, go out and invest in innovation and help make Australia a great place.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your time, Peter.